How would you react if you discovered your neighbor's luxury cars were about to be sold to the highest bidder because they parked where they shouldn't? I never thought I'd become the neighborhood villain for defending my own property. But that's exactly what happened last Saturday, when my peaceful afternoon turned into a parking nightmare. My name is Alex, and I've lived in Meadow Estates for 15 years. My house sits on 3 acres of land that back up to a small lake. I've spent thousands of dollars and countless weekends turning this place into my personal paradise. My favorite spot is the meadow that slopes down to the water, filled with native wildflowers, a few old oak trees, and a winding stone path I laid by hand. I was coming back from grocery shopping when I noticed something odd: a line of cars turning into my private driveway. At first, I thought they had made a wrong turn, but as I pulled closer, my stomach dropped. There were at least 20 vehicles parked across my meadow, with more arriving by the minute. "Hey, what's going on here?" I called out to a valet in a red vest who was directing a Mercedes SUV onto my property. "We're handling parking for the Martinez party next door," he answered casually, as if this was completely normal. I hurried inside, dropped my groceries on the counter, and marched straight to my neighbor's house. Eleanor Martinez's mansion was decorated with pink balloons and a giant Sweet 16 banner. Music blasted through expensive speakers, and teenagers in fancy clothes milled around the entrance. Eleanor spotted me before I could ring the doorbell. She wore a designer dress and had that perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Alex, how lovely to see you," she said, blocking my path to her door. "Enjoying the beautiful day." "Why are there dozens of cars parked on my property?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Eleanor's smile didn't waver. "Oh, we're having Sophia's Sweet 16 today. Didn't you get the HOA notice?" "What notice?" She dug through her purse and pulled out a wrinkled paper. "The HOA granted us temporary easement for overflow parking. President Marlowe approved it this morning. See?" She pointed to a hasty signature at the bottom. I scanned the document, my anger building with each word. I never agreed to this. Nobody contacted me. "Well, the board voted. Nothing you can do until tomorrow," Eleanor said, her fake sympathy making my blood boil. "It's just for today, and Sophia has so many friends. Where else would everyone park?" As if on cue, a Porsche Cayenne drove over my flower bed, crushing the black-eyed Susans I'd planted last spring. "Those cars need to be moved now," I insisted. Eleanor's friendly mask slipped for a second. "Look, all the important families in Meadowbrook are here. Judge Wilson's son, Dr. Patel's daughters, even Mayor Collins dropped off his twins. You really want to make a scene?" A group of parents glanced our way, champagne glasses in hand. "This wasn't authorized by me," I said firmly, "and that document doesn't specify which parts of my property they can use." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Don't be difficult, Alex. It's just for a few hours." She turned away, calling out to new arrivals and effectively dismissing me. I walked back to my property, documenting the damage with my phone. Tire tracks cut through my carefully tended grass. Someone had knocked over the stone birdbath near my oak tree. A teenager was sitting on my private dock, dangling his feet in the water while texting. By sunset, 57 vehicles had trampled my land. I counted each one, taking photos of license plates and damage. Music and laughter drifted across the lake until well past midnight, while I sat in my darkened living room, researching HOA bylaws on my laptop. What I discovered made my hands shake with outrage. The easement required written permission from the property owner, me. The document Eleanor had waved in my face was incomplete and possibly fraudulent. And most importantly, I found a clause that would become the cornerstone of my response. Sunday morning brought quiet and the departure of most vehicles, but 7 cars remained parked haphazardly across my meadow, their owners having apparently enjoyed the party too much to drive home. I watched from my window as Eleanor emerged from her house in a silk robe, coffee cup in hand. She surveyed the aftermath with satisfaction, never once looking toward the destruction of my property. That's when I knew this wasn't just about one party. This was about power and entitlement. Eleanor had deliberately used her position on the HOA board to override my property rights. She thought her social connections made her untouchable. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Monday dawned with grim determination as I picked up my phone and dialed HOA President Marlowe's number. My meadow still hosted 7 vehicles whose owners hadn't bothered to return. Through my kitchen window, I could see tire tracks cutting through my irises and empty champagne bottles floating in my koi pond. "Alex, what can I do for you this morning?" Marlowe's cheerful voice grated on my already frayed nerves. "You can explain why you approved parking on my property without my consent," I replied coldly. "Eleanor said you'd verbally agreed but were out of town to sign the paperwork." "That's completely false," I said, watching a cardinal try to return to his nest in a trampled bush. "I never agreed to anything." "Well, there must have been some miscommunication," Marlowe stammered. "I'll look into it right away." "While you're looking, you should know there are still 7 cars abandoned on my land," I added, "and significant damage to my landscaping." "I'm sure Eleanor will make it right," he said quickly. "She's a valued board member, you know. Very generous with her time and contributions." That last word caught my attention. Contributions? To the community, of course. Just last month, she donated $10,000 to the landscaping fund. The pieces clicked into place. Eleanor's generosity had bought her influence. The timing was no coincidence. "I'll expect a full accounting of this situation by end of day," I said firmly before hanging up. My next call was to a lawyer friend who specialized in property disputes. After explaining the situation, she gave me welcome news. "They've overstepped, Alex. The HOA can't grant access to your private property without explicit consent, especially not for a private event. Document everything and send me those photos by noon." I'd created a detailed report of the damages: crushed plants, tire ruts in the lawn, trampled flower beds, oil stains on my path, and trash scattered across the meadow. My estimate for repairs came to over $3,000, but it was while reviewing the HOA covenants that I found my opportunity. Section 7.4 stated clearly, unauthorized vehicles remaining on private property for over 24 hours may be managed at the owner's discretion following documented notification. I printed 7 official notices, each in a bright orange envelope, and placed one on each windshield. Notice: this vehicle is unlawfully parked on private property. If not removed by 5 p.m. Wednesday, it will be considered abandoned and subject to removal at owner's expense. Then I made 3 important phone calls: 1 to a towing company, 1 to a friend who runs auctions, and 1 to rent portable fencing. By Tuesday afternoon, word had spread through Meadowbrook Estates. I was weeding what remained of my flower bed when Eleanor stormed across her lawn toward me, designer heels sinking into the soft ground with each angry step. "Remove those ridiculous notices immediately," she demanded, her face flushed with anger. "That blue Porsche belongs to my daughter's boyfriend, and the others belong to board members' children." I straightened up slowly, garden gloves covered in soil. "The notices clearly state vehicles must be removed by 5 p.m. tomorrow. I'm simply following HOA protocol, documentation, and notification." "This is completely unreasonable." Eleanor's voice rose, attracting attention from another neighbor walking his dog. "It was just a party." "A party I never authorized on my property," I corrected her. "Your guests caused thousands in damages." Eleanor's expression shifted to one of calculated reasonableness. "I'm sure we can work something out. The HOA maintenance fund could cover any minor repairs." "The damages aren't minor," I replied. "And I've already documented everything for insurance purposes." "Insurance?" Her confident facade cracked slightly. "There's no need to involve insurance companies." I disagree. My policy covers vandalism and trespassing incidents. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. You're making a big mistake, Alex. My husband golfs with half the neighborhood. People won't appreciate this pettiness. Is that a threat? I asked quietly. She gave a brittle laugh. Of course not. Just a friendly reminder that communities work best when people are reasonable. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Wednesday, 5 p.m. After that, the vehicles are considered abandoned under Section 7.4 of the HOA covenants. Eleanor froze momentarily before continuing her retreat, phone already pressed to her ear. That evening, I received a call from Marlowe, panic evident in his voice. Whatever you're planning, stop now. The board is meeting tonight to discuss this situation. Too late, I replied calmly. Everything's arranged for tomorrow. What exactly are you planning? Marlowe's voice quavered. I smiled to myself. Just exercising my rights under the covenants. The same covenants you selectively enforced to allow 57 cars to destroy my property. Be reasonable. I've been more than reasonable, I interrupted. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to remove those vehicles. After that, things get interesting. I hung up and continued preparing. The security company had finished installing temporary cameras around my meadow. The auction website was set up, pending activation. The portable fencing would arrive at dawn. As darkness fell, I sat on my back porch, watching fireflies rise from what remained of my meadow. For the first time since Saturday, I felt a sense of calm. Eleanor and the HOA board had underestimated me, thinking I would roll over and accept their entitlement as law. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Wednesday morning arrived with heavy fog rolling off the lake, shrouding my property in ghostly white. I sipped coffee on my porch, watching as the crew quietly installed portable fencing around each abandoned vehicle. They worked efficiently, completing the job before most of Meadowbrook's residents had finished their breakfast. My phone buzzed with a text from Marlowe. Board emergency meeting at 4 p.m. Your presence requested. I replied simply, can't make it. Prior commitments. By noon, curious neighbors were walking or driving slowly past my house, trying to figure out what was happening with the fenced-in luxury cars on my meadow. I nodded politely to each of them, continuing my work setting up a small podium near the property line. At 2:37 p.m., a black Lexus screeched to a halt at my curb. A young man in expensive clothes jumped out, running toward the fenced blue Porsche. "Hey, that's my car!" he shouted, rattling the fence. "What's going on?" I walked over calmly, clipboard in hand. "Are you James Winters?" "Yeah," he said, confusion replacing anger. "How did you know?" "Your vehicle information is on file with the DMV," I said, showing him the notice. "This car has been parked illegally on private property for over 96 hours. The notice clearly stated it needed to be removed by 5 p.m. today." James ran his hand through his hair. "Look, I just got back from my dad's cabin. I didn't know about any notice." "Perhaps you should have considered the consequences before abandoning your vehicle on someone else's property after an unauthorized party," I suggested mildly. "So unlock the fence and I'll move it right now," he said, reaching for his keys. I checked my watch. "I'm afraid that's not possible until after 5 p.m. "What? Why?" His face reddened. "That makes no sense. The legal notification period ends at 5 p.m. Until then, everything stays as is." "This is insane." James pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Sophia's mom. She'll straighten this out." "Please do," I said, returning to my preparations. Within 20 minutes, Eleanor's Mercedes roared up my driveway. She emerged like a thundercloud, designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, phone clutched in her manicured hand. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing at the fenced vehicles. "James says you won't let him take his car." "The notices were very clear," I replied, continuing to arrange chairs beside the podium. "All vehicles must be removed by 5 p.m., or they'll be considered abandoned." Eleanor's eyes widened as she took in the auction signs I was setting up. An auction? You can't be serious. Completely serious, I confirmed. Section 7.4 of the covenants you're so fond of enforcing allows me to manage abandoned vehicles at my discretion. This is outrageous. Eleanor's voice reached a pitch that made nearby birds take flight. These are valuable cars belonging to important people. Important people who trespassed on private property and abandoned their vehicles for days, I said. Actions have consequences, Eleanor. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a menacing whisper. My husband will sue you into bankruptcy. For what? I asked pleasantly. Following the exact HOA rules you used against me? I have documentation of everything. The unauthorized easement, the property damage, the abandoned vehicles, the proper notifications. I followed every legal requirement. Eleanor's face contorted with rage. She pulled out her phone again, furiously dialing. Marlo, get over here now, and bring Sheriff Davis. While Eleanor paced and made increasingly frantic calls, I finished my preparations. A small refreshment table was set up near the podium. The auction website displayed countdown timers for each vehicle. Security cameras recorded everything from multiple angles. By 4:30 p.m., a crowd had gathered. Neighbors I rarely spoke to lingered at the edges of my property, whispering among themselves. Several teenagers huddled near James, who stood miserably by the fence surrounding his Porsche. Marlo arrived with 4 other board members, all wearing expressions ranging from embarrassment to outrage. They huddled with Eleanor, casting nervous glances my way. The sheriff is on his way, Marlo announced, approaching me with forced confidence. This has gone far enough, Alex. I couldn't agree more, I replied. It went too far when 57 vehicles were directed onto my property without permission. We can discuss compensation for any damages, he offered, lowering his voice. But this auction needs to be called off immediately. The auction goes live at 6 p.m., I said firmly. Unless, of course, the vehicles are removed before 5 p.m. Marlo glanced at his watch. That's only 25 minutes from now. Then I suggest you start moving them, I said reasonably. We can't, Eleanor interjected, joining our conversation. The towing company can't get here until 5:30, and the other owners are still driving back from various places. I shrugged. Not my problem. You created this situation when you directed people to park on my property without permission. Sheriff Davis's patrol car pulled up at precisely 4:45 p.m. The crowd parted as he approached, notebook already in hand. I recognized him from community events, but had never spoken with him directly. Afternoon, folks, he said, looking between me and the increasingly agitated board members. Got a report about some kind of dispute. Eleanor jumped in before I could speak. This person is trying to steal our children's cars. It's completely illegal. Sheriff Davis turned to me with raised eyebrows. These vehicles have been abandoned on my private property following an unauthorized event, I explained calmly. I've provided proper notification under Section 7.4 of the HOA covenants, and after the deadline passes at 5 p.m., I'm exercising my right to manage the abandoned property. Do you have documentation? The sheriff asked. I handed him my clipboard containing copies of everything. Property deed, HOA covenants, photos of the damage, copies of the notices, and time-stamped photos showing when each notice was placed. Sheriff Davis reviewed the materials carefully while Eleanor fumed beside him. This is ridiculous, she finally burst out. These are our children's vehicles. Tell him he can't do this. The sheriff looked up from my documentation. Ma'am, based on what I'm seeing here, the property owner has followed proper procedure. The vehicles are indeed on private property without authorization. But the HOA approved it, Eleanor insisted. Actually, I interjected, pulling out the document she'd waved in my face on Saturday. This purported easement is invalid. It required my signature as the property owner, which it doesn't have. And interestingly, when I called the HOA office this morning, They had no record of any official meeting to approve this. Sheriff Davis turned to Marlowe. Is that true? Marlowe's face drained of color. There may have been some procedural oversights. Procedural oversights? I repeated incredulously. You allowed 57 vehicles to trespass on my property based on a fraudulent document. Eleanor's daughter, Sophia, pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. Please don't sell James's car. His dad will kill him and he'll break up with me. The crowd had grown larger, with more neighbors arriving to witness the drama. Phones were out, recording everything. I spotted Mrs. Parker, who wrote the community newsletter, taking notes. At 4:58 p.m., Marlowe pulled me aside, his voice barely audible. Name your price to stop this madness. I looked at him steadily. This isn't about money. It's about respect for other people's property and following the rules that apply to everyone. The auction website displayed on my tablet showed the countdown. 1 minute remaining before bidding would open. The first lot, a 2023 Porsche 911 in sapphire blue, starting bid $50,000. Eleanor grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. You can't do this to us. Do you have any idea who we are in this community? I removed her hand firmly. I know exactly who you are, Eleanor. The question is, do you? The clock struck 5 p.m., and a soft chime sounded from my tablet as the auction countdown expired. Sheriff Davis checked his watch. It's 5 p.m. What happens now? Every eye in the growing crowd turned toward me, waiting for my next move. Your cars are about to be sold, I texted my neighbor with a photo of the auction notice. My phone immediately exploded with calls from Eleanor, which I ignored while watching her sprint across her perfectly manicured lawn toward my house. By Tuesday afternoon, gossip buzzed through Pinehurst Heights like angry hornets. I stood sorting mail when Eleanor ambushed me, her designer sunglasses pushed up into her highlighted hair. What do you think you're doing? She demanded, waving her phone in my face. Those notices better come down right now. That's my daughter's boyfriend's new Porsche, and the others belong to board members' children. I calmly finished organizing my envelopes before responding. Actually, I'm doing exactly what your HOA handbook recommends. Page 37, Section 4B, dealing with abandoned vehicles on private property. Eleanor's face turned an interesting shade of purple. Abandoned? They've only been there 2 days, and they received proper notice yesterday. The rules say 24 hours. I even laminated the warning so the morning dew wouldn't damage them. I held up my phone, showing photos of each notice placement. Would you like to see the timestamps? This is ridiculous. You know who I am in this community. Precisely why you should understand rules better than anyone, I replied. I've documented everything. The tire tracks through my flower beds, the beer bottles in my koi pond, even the moment you directed that red BMW to park beside my oak tree. Eleanor's confidence wavered slightly. Marlowe won't let this happen. Marlowe doesn't own my property. I checked with my lawyer this morning, who found it fascinating that temporary easements were granted without proper documentation. What Eleanor didn't know was that I'd spent yesterday afternoon calling in favors. My college roommate Sarah now ran a successful auction house specializing in luxury items. My nephew, Tyler, who graduated with a degree in media studies, helped set up 4 live stream cameras pointed at the vehicles. My brother-in-law, who owned a security company, installed temporary fencing that would arrive at dawn. Eleanor stormed off, frantically texting as she walked. I noticed she kept glancing back at my property, likely wondering if I was bluffing. I wasn't. That evening, I received emails confirming everything was set. The portable fencing would arrive at 5 a.m. The auction website would go live at noon, and security personnel would monitor the property boundaries starting at 6 a.m. I'd even hired a professional appraiser to document each vehicle's condition with photographs. Proof against any damage claims. At dinner, I checked social media and found Pinehurst Heights private group buzzing with speculation. Several neighbors I'd never spoken to sent friend requests. A local news reporter, whose child attended school with Eleanor's daughter, messaged asking for my side of the story. Just before midnight, my doorbell rang. Marlowe stood there, looking exhausted, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "This has gotten out of hand," he said, stepping inside without invitation. "Eleanor's husband is threatening legal action." "Against what?" I asked, offering him water, which he declined. "Enforcing rules their HOA created?" "You know this isn't how we handle things here. And how do you handle things? By letting board members take advantage of everyone else?" I pulled out my property survey. "See this line? Everything beyond it is mine. Yet somehow 57 cars ended up there without my permission." Marlowe rubbed his temples. "What will it take to end this quietly?" "Nothing quiet about it anymore," I said, showing him my phone. The story had reached 3 local Facebook groups. "People are tired of double standards. The board is meeting tomorrow at 4 p.m. Please hold off until then." I shook my head. "The notices specify 5 p.m. Wednesday. The auction goes live at 6. That gives you plenty of time to move the vehicles." "Or what? You'll really sell a teenager's Porsche?" Marlowe looked genuinely concerned. "I guess we'll find out," I replied, opening the door. "I'm curious myself." After he left, I checked my security cameras. 2 people with flashlights were examining the notices on the windshields. I zoomed in. Eleanor's daughter and a boy I assumed was the Porsche owner. They took photos, talked animatedly, then hurried away. Just past 2 a.m., my yard motion sensors triggered. Someone was attempting to start one of the cars. I called the police and reported attempted theft on my property. By the time officers arrived, the person had fled, but now I had official documentation of nighttime disturbances. At dawn, everything changed. The fencing company arrived precisely on time. 4 workers quietly unloaded metal barriers, creating a perfect rectangle around the vehicles. Security cameras captured Eleanor watching from her window, phone pressed to her ear. By 10 a.m., professional signs had been posted. "Unauthorized vehicle auction. 6 p.m. today." The auction website went live at noon, featuring detailed photos of each vehicle. Within an hour, 50 people had registered as potential bidders. My phone rang constantly. I let everything go to voicemail. The HOA official email sent 3 increasingly desperate messages, the final one threatening to revoke my membership privileges. At 2 p.m., a local news van parked across the street. At 3 p.m., Marlowe texted that the emergency board meeting had been moved up. At 4 p.m., the first curious neighbors began gathering near my property line. "Can they really do this?" I overheard someone asking. "My cousin's a lawyer. He says if they followed notification procedures, absolutely," another replied. At 4:30 p.m., I stepped onto my porch and surveyed the scene. The auction podium had been delivered. The portable fence gleamed in the afternoon sun. 7 luxury vehicles sat waiting, their owners nowhere in sight. My phone vibrated with a text from Sarah. "Online bidding already at $7,500 for the Porsche. This is going to be wild." I smiled and checked my watch. 30 minutes until showtime. "Stop this auction immediately." Eleanor's voice cut through the murmur of the gathering crowd. She marched toward me, flanked by Marlowe and 4 other HOA board members, their faces twisted with anger and panic. Behind them, a group of teenagers huddled together, including Eleanor's daughter, Zoe, whose makeup was smeared from crying. I stood behind a table arranged with lemonade and cookies, greeting neighbors who had come to watch the spectacle. My laptop displayed the auction website, where over 120 people were now registered to bid. "Welcome to the neighborhood event," I said pleasantly. "Refreshments? You think this is funny?" Eleanor pushed past 2 security guards, her designer heels sinking into the soft grass. "These are our children's cars. I've called the sheriff, and you'll be sorry when he gets here." "I'm glad you called him," I replied, checking my watch. "He can make sure everything proceeds legally." You're just in time. The auction starts in 20 minutes. A small crowd had gathered behind the fence. Some neighbors filmed with their phones. I spotted Mrs. Jenkins from across the street, who'd complained about Eleanor's music for years, but was always ignored. "This woman is trying to steal our children's property," Eleanor announced to the onlookers. "She's gone completely crazy." "Actually," I responded, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I'm simply following the procedure outlined in the HOA handbook that you personally approved last year." I held up a document with Eleanor's signature highlighted in yellow. Section 4B, regarding vehicles left on private property without permission. Marlowe stepped forward, trying to appear reasonable. "Look, we understand you're upset about the party. Perhaps we can discuss compensation for any damage." "We're well past that point," I said. "I tried discussing this yesterday when I discovered 57 cars had been parked on my property without permission. I was told, and I quote, 'nothing you can do about it.'" A murmur spread through the crowd. "But these are children's vehicles," protested another board member, a thin man named Gregory who owned the local insurance agency. "Which makes it even more surprising that adults would encourage them to park illegally," I replied. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up, and Deputy Rodriguez stepped out, looking bewildered at the scene. Eleanor immediately rushed over. "Thank goodness you're here. This woman is trying to steal 7 vehicles." Deputy Rodriguez approached cautiously. "Ma'am, can you explain what's happening here?" I handed him a folder containing copies of everything. My property deed with boundaries clearly marked, the falsified easement document, photos of the vehicles with timestamp notices, and printouts of the HOA rules regarding abandoned vehicles. "These vehicles were left on my private property during an unauthorized party," I explained calmly. "Following HOA procedures, I posted notices giving owners 24 hours to remove them. That deadline passed at 5 p.m. today." The deputy reviewed the documents carefully, while Eleanor fumed beside him. "She's twisting the rules," Eleanor insisted. "Nobody actually enforces that section." "So the rules only apply to certain people?" I asked innocently. Deputy Rodriguez looked up from the papers. "These notices appear to be in order, and this is definitely private property according to the survey." "But she can't just sell other people's cars." Eleanor's voice had reached an impressive pitch. "Actually," the deputy said, "under state law, after proper notification, abandoned property can be sold to cover storage and removal costs." Eleanor's face turned alarmingly red. "These aren't abandoned. The kids were coming to get them." "After the 5 p.m. deadline," I pointed out, "I have security footage of someone trying to remove a vehicle at 2 a.m. without permission, which required police response for attempted theft." Deputy Rodriguez nodded. "I saw that report." Zoe pushed through the adults, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Please don't sell Jason's Porsche. His dad will kill him, and he'll break up with me. We didn't know she would get so mad about some stupid grass." I felt a twinge of sympathy for the girl, but remembered my trampled flower beds and the koi I'd found floating dead after the party. "The auction starts in 10 minutes, I announced. "The starting bid for the Porsche is already at $15,000. This caused a fresh wave of panic. Jason, a tall boy in a Letterman jacket, pushed forward. "That's less than half what it's worth. My dad just bought it last month." "Then perhaps he should have taught you to respect other people's property," I suggested. Marlowe grabbed my arm and pulled me aside, lowering his voice. "This has gone far enough. What do you really want?" "Exactly what I wanted yesterday. Accountability." "Name your price," he hissed. "We can write you a check right now." "It's not about money." "Then what? Revenge? You'll destroy relationships over some tire tracks?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "It's about fairness. For 3 years, I've watched Eleanor get special treatment because she's on the board. Last month, the Gonzalez family was fined $500 because their moving truck parked on the street overnight. Last week, elderly Mr. Wilson received a violation notice because his garden gnome exceeded the height restriction by 2 inches. Yet somehow, it's perfectly fine for board members' children to destroy my property. Marlowe's expression shifted as he realized this had become much bigger than a parking dispute. Meanwhile, Eleanor had moved to the fence, where she was frantically trying to convince the security guard to let her in to remove the vehicles. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said firmly. "I can only take instructions from the property owner." The website on my laptop showed that online bidding had begun early. The red BMW was up to $12,000. The Porsche had reached $12,000. The Porsche had reached $23,500. Eleanor's husband David arrived, stepping out of his Range Rover with a man in an expensive suit, who I assumed was their lawyer. They huddled with Marlowe, occasionally glancing in my direction. Zoe approached me again, this time without her friends. "My mom says you're just jealous because you live alone and don't have kids," she said quietly. "But that's not it, is it?" I was surprised by her perception. "No, it's not. Is there anything I can do? Please. Jason saved for months to help his dad buy that car." For the first time, I hesitated. The girl seemed genuinely distressed, unlike her mother, who was now yelling at the lawyer for not immediately solving the problem. Deputy Rodriguez returned from his cruiser. "I've consulted with my supervisor. Everything appears to be legally sound, but he suggests mediating this dispute before the auction proceeds." Eleanor's lawyer approached with Marlowe and David. "My client is prepared to discuss reasonable compensation for damages," he stated formally, "and an appropriate response to the unauthorized easement falsification," I added. The lawyer blinked, clearly not having been informed of that detail. "5 minutes to auction," called Sarah from behind the podium. The crowd had grown larger. 3 more news vans had parked down the street. Eleanor's face had gone from red to pale as she realized this was actually happening. Marlowe checked his phone and paled. "The Porsche bid is at $30,000 now." "That's less than Blue Book value," I noted, "but the bids are climbing quickly." David finally spoke directly to me. "What will it take to stop this right now?" "Stop the bidding!" Eleanor screamed, her face turning bright red as the Porsche's price hit $45,000 online. The crowd of curious neighbors who'd gathered to watch the spectacle murmured excitedly. I pretended not to hear her and nodded to the auctioneer to continue. "I can have you arrested," she threatened, grabbing my arm. The sheriff gently removed her hand from my sleeve. "Ma'am, please don't make this worse for yourself. Touching someone without permission could be considered assault." Eleanor's daughter sobbed loudly into her phone. "Daddy, please come home now. They're selling Tyler's car." I signaled the auctioneer to take a 10-minute break. "Let's talk inside," I suggested, my voice steady despite my racing heart. This was working even better than I'd planned. My living room felt crowded with the 7 of them squeezed onto my furniture. The air conditioner struggled against the summer heat and their collective anger. Eleanor refused to sit, pacing by my fireplace, while Marlowe kept checking his watch nervously. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Eleanor spat, her designer purse clutched tightly to her chest. "Actually, I'm not," I replied honestly. "I'd rather be tending to my garden that your guests destroyed. But here we are." I slid a folder across my coffee table. Inside were 3 simple typed pages and plenty of blank space for signatures. "My terms are straightforward," I explained. "First, the HOA admits in writing that they wrongfully gave permission to use my land without consent and pays for all damages, approximately $7,800 for landscaping repairs, koi replacement, and meadow restoration." Marlowe started to object, but I raised my hand. "I have before and after photos and 3 landscaper estimates. The numbers are fair." "Second," I continued, "Eleanor resigns from the board immediately. Her position goes to someone elected properly, not appointed by friends." Eleanor's gasp was dramatic enough for a soap opera. Never! I've been on that board for 9 years. 9 years of bending rules for yourself and punishing others for minor violations, I countered. Mrs. Johnson across the street was fined $500 for having the wrong shade of white trim. Yet you hosted a party with live music until 2 a.m. without permits. The sheriff, who'd followed us inside, nodded slightly. He'd been called about the noise that night. And third, I continued, the HOA bylaws get amended to require written permission from any property owner before their land can be used for any reason. No more verbal agreements that mysteriously happen when someone is away. Through the window, I could see more cars arriving, parents of teens whose vehicles were in my makeshift auction lot. One man in a business suit was examining his son's BMW, his phone pressed to his ear as he gestured angrily. "You have no right," Eleanor started, but Marlowe cut her off. "What happens if we refuse?" he asked, his voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. "Then the auction continues," I said. "I've already received interest from buyers in 3 states. The cars were abandoned on private property after proper notification. It's completely legal." I opened my laptop to show them the live stream of bidders commenting. The Porsche already had 27 bids. Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face paled. "Tyler's father is threatening to sue us personally," she whispered to Marlowe. "He's a corporate lawyer." For the first time, cracks appeared in her perfect facade. Her hand trembled as she sat down, her phone buzzing incessantly. The doorbell rang, followed by loud knocking. Through the peephole, I spotted at least 5 angry parents on my porch. I turned back to the board members. "Decision time," I said. "I can open that door and explain why their children's cars are being sold, or you can sign these papers, and I cancel the auction immediately." Marlowe reached for a pen. "How do we know you'll stop the auction?" "Because, unlike some people in this room, I keep my word," I replied. "The sheriff is our witness." Eleanor's mascara streaked down her cheeks as she watched Marlowe sign. "This is blackmail," she whispered. "No," the sheriff corrected. "This is consequences. There's a big difference." The knocking grew louder. Someone was calling Eleanor's name from outside. "Sign or don't sign," I said, checking my watch. "But in 5 minutes that Porsche belongs to someone in Michigan." Cameras flashed as Eleanor handed me the oversized check for $7,800 on my front lawn. Our local newspaper reporter scribbled notes furiously while neighbors watched from across the street. Everyone in Pinterest Heights had heard about the almost auction by now. "Smile, Eleanor," I whispered through gritted teeth. "It's important to be a good sport when you lose." Her eyes shot daggers at me, but she managed a tight smile for the camera. The headline would read, "HOA settles dispute after unauthorized use of private property." I'd made sure of that by inviting the press myself. "This is just the beginning," Eleanor hissed as soon as the photographer turned away. "You've made powerful enemies." I accepted the check calmly. "Actually, I've just enforced rules that should have been followed all along. That's hardly making enemies." Behind us, workers were already replanting my damaged garden beds. The tire marks across my meadow would take longer to fix, but the koi pond was being refilled today. I'd insisted that repairs begin immediately as part of the settlement. That evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find Eleanor's husband, James, standing awkwardly on my porch without his wife. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice low. "There's something you should know." I hesitated but waved him inside. He declined my offer of coffee and sat stiffly on the edge of my couch. "Eleanor didn't tell me what she'd done until after the auction started," he explained, staring at his hands. "I want to apologize personally. Our daughter's birthday wasn't worth damaging someone's property." His sincerity surprised me. "Thank you," I said simply. "There's more," he continued. "Eleanor's been using HOA funds to renovate parts of our house, classifying personal expenses as community improvements. That's why she fought so hard to stay on the board." My mouth fell open. That's illegal. Yes, he nodded grimly. And once the new board audits the books, which they will, it'll all come out. I've been trying to convince her to return the money before that happens. 2 weeks later, I received a formal invitation to attend the emergency HOA meeting. The community center buzzed with tension as I took my seat. Nearly every homeowner had shown up after hearing rumors of financial misconduct. Retired Judge Thomas Hamilton, who'd been elected to replace Eleanor, called the meeting to order. Following our financial audit, we've discovered approximately $42,000 in misappropriated funds over the past 3 years. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back shouted, "Where's Eleanor?" "Mrs. Coleman has resigned from the community entirely," Hamilton announced. "Her husband has reimbursed all misused funds with interest, and they've listed their home for sale." I spotted James slipping in through the side door, looking exhausted. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. After the meeting, several neighbors who'd previously ignored me stopped to chat. Mrs. Johnson from across the street hugged me tightly. "You did what none of us had the courage to do," she whispered. "Stand up to her." 6 months later, my restored property hosted the Pinehurst Heights Summer Picnic. My once damaged meadow bloomed with wildflowers, and children played tag around the new gazebo I'd built near the lake. The HOA had voted unanimously to name it Community Outlook, a small joke about keeping a watchful eye on things. Marlowe approached, carrying 2 lemonades. He'd remained on the board, but had become an unlikely ally in reforming our community rules. "You wouldn't believe the change in this place," he said, handing me a drink. "Property values are up, complaints are down, and for the first time we had more volunteers than positions for the garden committee." "Amazing what happens when people feel they're being treated fairly," I replied. As sunset painted the lake golden, a familiar Porsche pulled into my driveway. Eleanor's daughter, Zoe, stepped out, no longer the crying teenager from auction day. "Sorry I'm late," she called, carrying a homemade pie. "College applications took forever." She'd started visiting me regularly, at first to apologize for her mother's behavior, but later because we discovered a shared interest in environmental science. I'd been helping her apply to universities with strong ecology programs, completely different from the business schools her mother had chosen. "Mom sold the house yesterday," she told me quietly as we walked along the lakeshore. "They're moving to Arizona. Dad seems relieved, but she's still angry at everyone here." "And you?" I asked gently. Zoe smiled, watching fireflies begin to dance over the water. "I'm applying to State University's environmental program. It's my choice, not hers." As stars appeared above us, Judge Hamilton raised his glass in a toast. To boundaries respected and lessons learned. I looked around at my neighbors, now friends, and realized something powerful. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about winning a battle. It's about transforming an entire community into something better than it was before. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you'd like to hear more, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next one.